the time of the Great Power Era during the 7th century, and it had almost full control over what is now the Baltic Sea, and the rise of the Russian Empire destroyed it, and the Prussian Empire, due to the defeat at Poltava in the 18th century. But Sweden also had an empire during the Viking Age era. Kievan Rus is often described as a state founded by Viking mercenaries, or being tribal and having no structure and being invited, as is the case with Rurik the chieftain. But during the 10th century, Erik the Victorious helped Vladimir the Great defeat his enemy with his Viking army. And during this time, Vladimir actually pledged allegiance to Erik to receive his soldiers. He was losing a war against Yaropolk and got through and was forced to flee to Sweden and Norway to seek help from Erik Hakon Jarl and Erik the Erik. And Erik actually, according to Swedish sources from the 18th century, supported Vladimir with his forces and with his Varangian army, and helped Vladimir recapture what is now described as Kievan Rus. One of Erik's soldiers, Åke, fell in love with Erik's daughter, and she does not have a name and is not described in sources, but according to Ingvar Saga, one of Erik's daughters loved her, but she was given away in marriage. Because when Erik's army had defeated Yaropolk, I think that she was offered as a wedding gift to Yaropolk to build a lasting peace between Yaropolk and Vladimir. But Vladimir the Great conspired with Åke, a chieftain, to murder Yaropolk, and is also described as the primary chronicle where two Varangians kill Yaropolk on his way to a peace meeting, and I think Erik and Vladimir were at that peace meeting, because it is described so in its 7th century Swedish source that I use, that is nationalistic biased, but I think it's a good source, and I will describe it in the end why I think it's a good source. Here you have seen an ambush, and Yaropolk was killed by Åke, that took Erik's daughter back to him home at Sweden, while Styrbjörn started to build up his forces to gain power in Sweden, and he built up his forces of Wends, Slavic people known for seafaring, and Danes, also people known for seafaring, while Erik was busy in Russia with all this peace negotiation. And after Yaropolk's death, the deal was cancelled, and Erik was pissed at Åke because he was jealous at Yaropolk for taking his love, and Vladimir for betraying him. But I think the peace deal was still on. Here you see two persons murdering one guy. Later on, Erik's Åke would be invited to a wedding when Erik betrayed Åke, because they became friends before, after, but then later Åke was betrayed and killed, and he had the protection by several jarls that probably saw that Åke was in love with Eric's daughter and protected him, but he killed all jarls and confiscated their property for killing Jarpolk. But in the start, he pretended to be Åke's friend, but he was then betrayed and killed at a wedding between Aun and Eric when he was remarried because he didn't like Sigurd the Haughty, so he remarried. And at that wedding, when Eric had his wedding, Åke was betrayed and stabbed because he had forgiven him for killing Jarapol, but that was probably just something he said because he prepared his revenge, and Åke had allied himself with powerful jarls, so he needed one place to take them all out in one sweep. And they tried to fight Åke's men, but they were drunk, so they could not fight very well, and had drunken too much mead. But Vladimir was also forced to swear allegiance to Eric. But the power dynamic is that Vladimir had control of all of Kievan Rus and was a tributary to Eric. And the medieval era is very much personal power dynamic. If you have a powerful leader, he will have control over everything. But just because he's powerful, that doesn't mean his son will be powerful, because he could be weak. And Iron Age is very much based on how strong the leader is or is perceived. And while Eric had been in Russia, Styrbjörn had started to gather his forces. One of Eric's nephews that had started to prepare his forces while Eric was gone in Russia. And they went with a large army. According to legend, Styrbjörn took Harald Bluetooth's daughter and burnt all of Copenhagen to threaten Harald Bluetooth into giving Styrbjörn his daughter, because he wanted to be king of Sweden and Denmark at the same time, and become the next king of Denmark and Sweden with his army of Danes and Wends. The battle went pretty badly though, and Styrbjörn was killed. He burnt his ships before going into battle, so there were no return. And they clashed. The two armies clashed, but Eric's army of well-fought Varangians that had been in Russia and fought against Pechenegs together with the Byzantines and had been bodyguards for the Byzantine Emperor, fought very hard. So instead of making Styrbjörn's army fight better, burning the ships meant that his army could not flee, so they were all killed by Eric's forces, even though they were numerically superior to Eric's forces. Torgny the Law Speaker used animals to destroy the flanks and with spears, like Greeks used them before, and chariots like the ancient Celts with pikes and spears to destroy the flanks or formations of Styrbjörn's forces before. And Sweden had the hill advantage because So the Styrbjörn's forces were mercilessly hacked to pieces by Eric's forces, and Torgny the Law Speaker remembered this and remembered Eric as a strong leader, but his son Olaf would not be as strong as Eric. And Eric was described as the victorious by Swedish sources after he conquered Denmark also. After the Battle of Fierce Valley, Eric chose to invade Denmark as retaliation for attacking the forces of the Swedes. So Eric basically conquered Kievan Rus and Denmark. They were all subservient to him, while Vladimir's betrayal made that Vladimir more powerful in the power dynamic, but he was still subservient or a vassal of Vladimir, and he owed Eric land because Eric had reinforced Vladimir and saved him from certain defeat with his Swedish warriors, so had to give Ladoga as a tributary gift to Sweden. Later on, he would be given to his son. Son's daughter would be given to Vladimir, as was fought out before with Eric's daughter, but this time no his daughter, so the deal went through. And Torgny was speaking up at Eric for not Olaf for being weak against the tributaries in the east, and wanted to use more strength to further Swedish dominion over the countries in the east, but he was a weak king and did not really reestablish the power dynamic that Torgny wanted. He was the law speaker and spoke for all men in Sweden that they wanted to conquer or strengthen the Swedish dominion over Kievan Rus. And the Romans also knew Swedish as an expansionist power with a great navy. So being the Kievan Rus was a tributary to Sweden, and the colony grew stronger eventually and would become the Russian Empire that would eventually defeat the old colony and Ukraine and Belarus, and Sweden all share the same roots or the same state. According to Swedish historian, Rurik was a son of Björn Ironside and was chosen by the Swedish king to be a tributary king in what was the Russian lands. But of course the Slavic dynamic and the fact that the Slavs were more probably played a part and made this tributary relationship more complex than just the Swedes bossing everyone around, more the Swedes adapting to the Slavic subjects. The sources I used was Ingvar Saga, and I used some 7th century and 18th century Swedish manuscripts because I think they have older Swedish sources that was lost due to the Great Fire at Three Crowns, where the whole Swedish archive burnt down, and older Swedish sources also mentioned that Erik militarily aided Styrbjörn, militarily aided Vladimir in his military campaigns, and that Styrbjörn prepared his forces. I think there are older runic manuscripts that were lost when 1698, when the Swedish National Library burnt down, and there we have a lot of sources that went lost. So I think modern Swedish historians say that our 18th century Swedish sources are bad, but I think there are some virtue to what they are actually saying here, that Eric militarily aided Vladimir, and I draw my own conclusions based upon that. So yeah, Sweden had an empire during the Viking era, and due to the failed Ingvar's expedition and later on fragmentation in Kievan Rus, I think that, and Sweden also had a turbulent era after Emund the Old, one of Eric's sons, Olaf's sons. I think it was fragmented and between sons because the Swedes had a idea of sharing power with their brothers, and I think that was one of the cases for it fragmenting fragmentation and eventual destruction of Kievan Rus and Sweden, because I think they were probably the part of the same state, because basically Swedes helped Kievan Rus in every military expedition, so it's more of a colony in the start, but it became a much more complex power dynamic between the Slavic and the Norse people during this era. And the first Swedish forces would also serve as the Byzantine emperor's Varangian Guard. And Ingegerd was given to Yaroslav after Eric the Victorious' death. But here you have an empire, and Eric would also invade the Holy Roman Empire. He had not as much success as he had in his other military campaigns, because probably a brilliant leader, because he defeated two enemies, Jaropolk and Styrbjörn, and both probably were numerically superior to his forces. And yeah, that's about it.